On the show today, we are diving into the NWSL's autumn press conference, where Commissioner Jess Berman held court at the league's headquarters in New York City on Thursday. Time now to welcome in Melanie and Asli. Hello, Melanie.
Hello, thanks for having us.
And hello, Asli.
Hi.
Before we dive into the nitty-gritty, you were both at headquarters in New York City. So let's start with setting the scene, Asli.
Every fall, just to remind our listeners, governors of the NWSL teams have a fall meeting where they discuss the most pressing issues at hand. And I bet the agenda was pretty much full, like really full with a lot of topics. And I think for me, the most interesting part was like, I think a little bit buried the league for me, because I thought she would include one of the most important topics that I tend to cover often, which is the business side of the league. And until I asked her about the expansion, if there are any teams being added to the league or what her expansion strategy is going to be, she's like, in fact, this is one of the pieces of news we're going to, let you guys in. And the league is basically changing their structure and how they're going to expand the league from a very structured timeline to a rolling admission style. That means instead of giving potential bidders a date to submit their bid, and in a moment where the league decides whether or not their bid is accepted, any interested parties, investor groups can apply, and then they will have enough or more time to prepare a compelling bid to join the league, which is, I think, important, but also it also reflects a bit for me the importance of infrastructure component that she mentioned multiple times, how important that is. We all know, most NWSL teams are sharing their infrastructure with either an MLS team or they have to share with an NFL team, which causes a lot of problems with the, scheduling. So we already know the last two teams to be added to the league, Boston and Denver, both were strong candidates because they were actually coming into the picture with infrastructure plans in place. So I think we will see more of those candidacies. And I thought that was very interesting that she didn't lead with that.
To add to that, I will say, unlike burying the lead with that very big news, as you mentioned, Asli, regarding the expansion process, which is huge. I'm sure you'll be reporting that out so much more in the coming weeks. One thing that we did expect, I will say, is conversations around player safety, which has been such a big conversation in recent weeks, or just all season long in the NWSL. It was one of the first questions that was kind of brought up when, the floor was kind of opened. Berman did start out by addressing some of kind of her talking points. If I'm sure everyone's been paying attention that there's been a lot of league announcements this week, very different things like a new combine that's coming, a mid-season expansion of the current media rights deal, another partnership with Canon. But again, that for me, what stood out the most is the fact that we did talk a lot about player safety with Jessica Berman, which I think will continue to be an ongoing conversation, especially as we look ahead to 2026 and the new season. It was specifically asked about, what lessons did Berman and the NWSL learn with, the unfortunate incident where Savvy King collapsed in May. And then, of course, more recently, which everyone I'm sure is familiar with, Savannah DeMello, unfortunately also collapsing. Of course, two very similar and unfortunate medical emergencies that were handled very, very differently. So that is where Jessica Berman did say, there are learnings that the league is taking those experiences and trying to do better, which is a promising sign. And of course, another kind of related to player welfare is I did ask about, how the league is paying attention to extreme heat, which of course was a huge conversation with the Club World Cup. It's an ongoing conversation in the world of soccer, of course, with 2026 on the horizon next year. And she did also allude to kind of taking learnings from this season to next season. Whether or not we'll see mid-season starts go away, that's a larger conversation, or midday starts, rather. But that's something that kind of stood out to me, and I'm curious to hear those conversations kind of expand as the season goes on.
We're going to dive deeper into all those topics in just a moment, but was the topic of Jessica Berman's contract renewal brought up?
I think maybe everybody was expecting something about that topic, and I think we were so focused on other questions. Finally, one of the journalists in the Zoom asked about it, and I thought her answer was very curious. She said she intends to be around as contract nears end. And I think there are ways of hearing that. Maybe it's a way of saying something. Is it because there isn't a consensus of, from the board to decide to continue her contract extended? Are they other candidates to take the job? Because as a league grows, because let's be honest, when she took the job, the league was at crossroads with, run by scandals. Valuations were between, I would say the franchise values were between $1 to $2 million. And in 4 years, we're at I think the average team valuation is at 100 million, and we know that some of them are sold over 200 million. So we know the league is growing. More billionaire owners are coming. It is, set to be the most successful women's soccer league in the world. That's the goal. There are problems like Melanie mentioned, and I feel like these are very important, issues that needs to be addressed properly. So I think one wonders what is underlined, what are the small prints in that, frame that she gave us her answer.
I will add to that. It was very, like you said, you can hear this in so many different ways. It was interesting to also see kind of how the announcements kind of came in this week, especially that announcement of the, mid-season expansion of the media rights deal. The media rights deal is something that I think stands out on her resume or her tenure in this position as commissioner. So that was something that I think she champions, that she will say, look, this is something that I did that was really good for the league. And it was interesting to see that it expanded that partnership. And, one of the main things about that expansion was that now you have Victory Plus, which is a free-to-stream platform, which kind of will provide more access to more people. She spoke a lot about that. And it's just interesting to know that this contract is kind of looming for a renewal while you're seeing some of these things kind of trickle in at the same time. So I think that points to a lot of things happening behind the scenes too.
Yeah, the league, Jessica Berman, really talking up the expanded broadcast and sponsorship news without giving any hard numbers away. Melanie, what should we make of that?
One of the interesting things about Berman's tenure is that has been such a priority for her. And it is interesting to see that continuing to be a priority. On the other side of that, it's interesting because as we reported extensively at The Athletic, there was an issue, or people questioned whether the priorities of Berman lied with her commercial interests or with the player welfare, specifically when we talk about the Kansas City game against Orlando Pride that was delayed for 3.5 hours, again, because of extreme heat. And we've reported how, Berman threatened to fine Kansas City Current, and because of losing that national broadcast window when they did push the game back. So again, it's interesting because, in one side you're seeing her hold on to that, which is a good thing that you are having these commercial interests and commercial investments. But again, these conversations we'll continue to have. I'm very curious to see how that kind of balances with these other larger conversations we need to be having too.
And let's not forget, it's a great media deal for, maybe distribution. Is it a great media deal for the consumer? And I think we also report often not finding the games in one place. And someone asked about that at the press conference, which I thought was a great question. And I wish we asked that question, because we were asking already so many questions. They were like, okay, limiting your questions now. Yeah. But the thing is, and she said, well, there are not a lot of leagues that have everything in one place. And I, kind of thought immediately, English Premier League and how easy to find games in a linear network and then have the streaming options. And And I feel like that's how the league grew its audience in the United States. And I was shocked that she defended this distribution model to be in different platforms, that it's better for the consumer. I do get that this new fast channel is going to really give access to people. And she said the demographic they're aiming is younger demographic who potentially cannot spend a lot of money on a streaming, deal. I love that. I'm glad we're not going to have to pay another fee to watch the league. But at the same time, I think strategically, putting everything in one platform, finding games every week in the same space is not a bad idea. As a consumer, I want to have that. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's funny because I think when it comes to soccer, specifically, like you mentioned, the Premier League, like that is a top 5 European global league that has been doing it for a very long time. And I look at MLS before the Apple deal, and the problem was, we have 60-something start times in a given week. It's on ESPN, it's on Fox, it's on regional networks where you can find it through ESPN Plus, et cetera, et cetera. And then they did away with all that. They streamlined the start times. They put the deal exclusively on Apple, and people complain about that. So I think that they do that. It's now behind a paywall, even though you're paying for one place to watch every single game. So I think sometimes these things are a little bit loaded with the idea of growing the game in this country, and that bleeds into the broadcast conversation, which brings me to my next topic, which is the quality on the field, which I think we all would agree that drives everything over where it can be found. It's who are we watching? With some of these epic transfers, Asla, that have happened in this year alone, the conversation has come up with the NWSL of, is the salary cap going to change? How is the NWSL competing with the global market? Were there any questions about that, and what was Berman's take?
Berman is very proud of the new CBA and where the salary cap is. And also she was very proud and emphasized how the league is working together, like as ownership groups, the league executives and everyone, to keep parity while also maintaining quality of play by alluring star players in our league. And she was very confident about, yes, of course there are people who want to go and play abroad, but this is still a very attractive proposition for players around the world. And there are a lot of foreigners who like to come and play here. And like she also mentioned how much they're trying to accommodate foreign players and their families so they will feel comfortable here. They will prefer to come and play at our league versus other leagues. And when we look at the CBAs from the past 3 years, salary cap went from 1,375,000, like 1.3, 1.4 million to 3.3 in this cycle. That will also reflect perhaps this is in fact a looming issue in the minds of the ownership and the executives of the league to ensure that they're not losing players for dollars, that they are keeping them here. And I feel like I'm not so much of an expert of how much money maybe a median player makes at WSL. It may not be as much as NWSL, but we know that the lowest salary today is $48,000 at our league here. It's still not a great number, but the impression she gave is that this is a topic that is also constantly being discussed to accommodate the needs of the players. That's what she said, right, Melanie? She said something about, okay, we have the CBA, we decided on this, but we're also constantly thinking and talking about this so that we're up to date with the needs of the players in this specific topic, and they're talking constantly with the PA. So different. I mean, I think this is another topic, like you said, in every league. We have the issue MLS with the designated player rule. We saw what it can bring to a league. Superstars will be more inclined to come and play. We didn't get a chance to ask one more question to see if there will be a designated player.
We're going to keep all these notes for when
Exactly.
Jessica Berman comes on full time. That's what we're
Exactly.
going to do.
We have to ask her the designated player, potential for this league. But yeah, it was pretty. She was open about like how the CBA is being constantly modified to meet these needs.
I think it's important to note that designated player rule is also known as the Beckham rule, and we all know the Beckham effect that was on Major League Soccer. So it's an interesting topic as it pertains to the NWSL. Melanie, go right ahead, jump in.
To Asa's point, it is interesting how, Berman still does, tout that the league is a destination for players. And, when we were reporting out Alyssa Thompson's transfer, she made clear, that she is interested in one day potentially coming back to the NWSL. This still is home for a lot of players. When Asa was speaking, one thing that reminded me that Jessica Berman mentioned was kind of how, in speaking with players, one of the things that foreign players had mentioned that was very important to them is having the games accessible at home for them. So, finding partnerships potentially in, different countries, making the league accessible for them. And I'm curious what that will do kind of to expand interest in the league. Maybe if more people are watching it from different parts of the world. I mean, we can see what that might do for interest, maybe more people having more eyes on, this as a potential destination for them.
I'd love to know from the both of you, with all of the topics that you mentioned, broadcast, player safety, player acquisitions, etc. What was your biggest takeaway?
I asked her about the expansion, right? And then she answered it. And I went back and like doubled down on asking like, but you keep mentioning your league can reach the NFL with 32 teams. Like, are you going for 32 teams? And she had, she was like, I think you never know when journalists took something from what you say and use it and how they understand. Like she had that moment where she wanted to open up her, comments that was, probably quoted over and over again in many news articles in the last year, because I think as journalists, of course, numbers are very important. If you're comparing your league with a big league and say we're going for, we can potentially have 32 teams. But I thought her explanation was interesting. She was going deep into telling us that when she said that, she was actually comparing the league. Like the goal isn't just about growth. It's not about having 32 teams by some date. It was more like when she said that, she meant the big leagues, NFL, NBA, NHL, they've grown to their size for two reasons. The sheer size of our country and the number of markets there, have teams, but also the strength of player pipeline, which impacts the product on the field that you asked us earlier. And she said those are same fundamentals that NWSL have, and that she didn't see a ceiling that is any different than these major leagues. I think it was like, I felt like it was important for her to like unpack that comment, that I thought it was probably will be also quoted in many articles going forward.
In addition to all that, of course, my biggest takeaway is what we've already talked about with player safety and kind of, the conversation around player welfare. I'm looking forward to seeing if the league has learned from, these moments this past season, kind of what it makes of it, especially next year, looking ahead to 2026. And especially to Asa's point, as the league continues to grow, we do have 2 expansion teams coming in, more players. And, I'm just very, very curious to see. And Jess Berman, she was also very transparent about, the process, which was one of the big questions in terms of like, how are these decisions being made when you have a medical emergency? And I will say that it was refreshing to hear, that they have streamlined their processes, that they are learning lessons. And something we haven't talked about that kind of as we're talking about all this, I remembered was I found it interesting how at the beginning when Jess Berman kind of outlined all the things that she wanted to talk about and she wanted to emphasize, one of the things she mentioned is how they're hoping to make the league improve the experience for players in terms of making it more friendly for mothers or working players. You know, she touted how there's a lot more, you know, either pregnant players or mothers in the league. So that's something that kind of stood out to me and is interesting to see how kind of that will look like in the future, what that might look like next year. And it was interesting because you did have, you know, we started this season with, you know, a few very notable players, you know, announcing their pregnancies and maternity leave. So it's interesting to me to watch the league kind of adapt in that direction, you know, kind of taking the lead from the players that kind of, you know, are the faces of this league. So that's just something that was interesting that stood out to me too.
Yeah, at least 13 mothers and 10 currently pregnant players in 2025. Before we say goodbye, what would each of you like personally to see more from the Commissioner Jessica Berman at this point in the season?
I mean,
and if there's no notes, that's an answer too.
I don't know. Let me
guess
pass.
as a journalist, transparency, more of these availabilities, more access to her, more answering these questions, you know. I think especially in moments where, you know, there have been a lot of moments this season where it would have been refreshing to hear from Berman sooner. You know, of course, this is a mid-season check-in. And, you know, it was, I guess, positioned as Asli mentioned how this is, you know, the fall governing meeting as like a recap of kind of the things they talked about. But, you know, I would love to see more of this, more accessibility, more transparency. And I guess that's just my journalist hat on when I say that.
I mean, it's impossible to not agree with you. Of course, that is a great point. You know,
all three of us can agree on that.
Three of us, yes, definitely.
Asli, Melanie, thank you both so much. And did you know The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to provide free, best-in-class coverage of women's sports? That's right. Go check out the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. That does it for our show today. As always, I am Jillian Sakovits. A big, big thank you to our producer, Theo Lloyd Hughes, our video producer, Leah Griffin, and our executive producer, Emily Olsen. Enjoy the chaos this weekend. We'll see you on Monday.